Hey, Kevin Lawrence here. Hope you're having a great day so far. I'm really excited to be here with Salim Ismail, who wrote a book that was transformational for a number of our clients. Exponential Organizations is the book. And in my simple summary terms, it takes principles of organizations that scale exponentially, and we can understand them and look for ways to apply them to transformational businesses or to transform existing business. So he's a best-selling author of Exponential Organizations and Exponential Transformation. Also, his new book we're talking about today is Exponential Organizations 2.0. And he's been building disruptive companies and a serial entrepreneur since the early 2000s, including PubSub Concepts, Angstro, which was acquired by Google in 2010. And where I got to know him was when he became the founding executive director of Singularity University and co-founder and chairman of OpenExO. And Salim can tell us more about that. But I met him at a conference when he was speaking about this, and I've seen him at some other events, and then even connected with one of my clients who I was just sharing with Salim has turned out to be a massive success, where we took the principles from exponential organizations to a traditional family business and created a disruptive digital startup off of it. And the principles and what Salim did to help educate the whole family dramatically helped. It was still really, really, really hard. And now that organization, actually, it's called ONAS. It's a luxury retail on pure play digital in the Middle East, in Dubai, and it's wildly successful. I was just speaking with the CEO about it a couple months ago. So Salim, thanks for taking the time today, and looking forward to our discussion.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, and great to be tracking all of this over the years.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us, to start with, explain the model for people that aren't familiar, what exponential organizations or the ExO framework is about.
Yeah, let me just add in a little color for the context of how this came about. So as some of your folks know, I'm Canadian. I'm originally from India, and I ended up as the head of innovation at Yahoo in the middle of all these startup efforts, and learned a fundamental lesson that when you try anything disruptive in an existing company, the immune system attacks you, right? Because all of our organizations are built to resist change and withstand risk. And yet now disruptive innovation is the high order bit. So how do you juxtapose with that is almost all of the work and thinking I've been doing for the last decade or so. And I wrote the original EXO book with the idea that, okay, we're seeing a new breed of organization where they've learned how to scale the org structure as fast as you can scale technology. So let me just share my slides, and I'll kind of
please
get my thing going here. Hopefully you can see see that. So this is the second edition of the book that came out a few months ago. We have a community of 33,000 consultants, advisors, entrepreneurs, technologists that use the book now. And this is the model and the way we came to this is we scanned 200 of the fastest growing unicorns and said, how are they doing scaling so quickly? So at the top, you have the massive transformative purpose, or your MTP, like Google organized the world's information, or Uber, everybody should have a private driver, or TED, ideas worth spreading. It's a tagline that states the fundamental problem you're trying to solve, right? And then we found 5 externalities on the right that allow you to keep a very small resource footprint and scale very quickly. Uber doesn't hire its own staff. TED uses community. Google and Microsoft are now using AI and algorithms. You have leveraged assets like Airbnb not owning its own rooms. And then digital engagement models, gamification, incentive prizes, etc. And those 5 externalities allow you, one or more of them, to allow you to scale very, very quickly. And then we found 5 internal mechanisms that allow you to have you manage the control framework and drive culture. Real-time dashboards to track the business, OKRs, for example, that whole lean startup thinking, scaling up type models like you're expert in, decentralized org structures and decision making, and then social technologies like Zoom, Slack, Chatter, etc. for peer-to-peer collaboration. And we found that the more, we now have pretty hard evidence, the more you use, the more valuable you get. And if I have some data of the last 7 years, if you want me to just show that.
That would be great. Yes, please.
So this is Robert Goldeberg. I'm just skipping through a couple of slides here. He's been applying this to mid-market industrial firms in the US and getting venture-style returns instead of traditional PE-style returns. He's getting like 10 to 30x outcomes with traditional
Amazing.
manufacturing companies, mid-market companies in the US. But what we've
And
done...
can you back up to that, Salim, on that
Sure.
piece? Like, what are some of the things that he is doing? Because you said it's a massive statement you made. He's getting those types of returns in traditional industrial businesses.
Yeah, so
that's like saying he's turning the sun off and on command. Like, it's
pretty much he's got it to that level. So you'll go to a ball bearing manufacturer in Ohio, right? And you'll go, okay, let's come in. I'm going to come in and apply to these attributes. And typically he's applying OKRs and MTP. And I want to see, he goes, I want to see if management can execute and get these implemented in 1 quarter. If they can, he comes with an investment and tries to take them 10x, and then he applies the rest of the model, lean startup thinking, etc.
Got it.
And what happens is, most of these mid-market companies are controlled by private equity firms that freeze innovation and strip out all the costs. What he's found is he can de-risk innovation using this approach to a lower level than freezing the innovation. Right. And then amazing. The company, you unlock a massive amount of latent innovation and the company soars. Okay. And again, he's done this now with a whole ton of companies. His moniker, his MTP is to reinvent American exceptionalism. And he's, after doing this with, a few dozen companies, he's got chops to talk about this. So we've been looking at how we can partner on an approach for mid-market companies to standardize this approach.
Love it.
Okay. Then for big companies, in 2015, when we launched the original book, we scored the Fortune 100 against this model. So here's a ranking of the Fortune 100 ranked by, essentially we're ranking how flexible, agile, purpose-driven, scalable the org structures, right? To what extent is Target using lean startup thinking? To what extent is John Deere purpose-driven or not, etc. I did a segment on CNBC Squawk Box promoting this index, just saying, hey, here's a ranking of this. Well, one of our community members, a guy called Chandra Nagpal, who did a bunch of work for UBS, tracked over 7 years which of the Fortune 100, the top 10 that use the attributes in the model the most, and the bottom 10 that use them the least. So really over a 7-year period, which are the most flexible and adaptable of the Fortune 100 versus the most rigid and least flexible, etc. Okay. And so after 7 years in kind of preparation for the recent book, we checked out the results. And so the top 10 blow away the bottom 10 by like a big number on revenue growth, 6 times more profitable, 11 times better return on equity. But the bottom row, which blew our minds, was shareholder returns. It turns out they deliver 40x better shareholder returns, CAGR, compound annual growth rate, than the bottom 10, right? I was saying earlier, we totally have the wrong business model. We should have created an investment fund out of this. It would have been the highest performing fund in the last decade ever. Anyway, live and learn. So we have now hard data. And why? Because as the external world becomes more volatile, your ability to adapt will drive market value, right? And now we had to like triple check the numbers because they're so absurd.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. But when you understand the principles, and I've seen people apply it, and you can see how it speeds things up, uses less resources, and things just move. Where in traditional businesses, everything is almost like you described with sometimes the private equity, things get locked down. And things become slow, and also those companies aren't a lot of fun to work with either, because they get
you can't do anything, right?
Nothing happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's Groundhog Day.
It's it's great. It's a great.
It is. So in terms of the principles, when you've seen, and you talked about that one gentleman in the industrial space, what are the things that you've seen, the principles that, although they might be difficult, can make the biggest impact in an existing organization? Is there one of them that you see, like the MTP I get, and lots of our clients are purpose-led. Most are purpose-led, and they have a MTP or they have a purpose and a BHAG, whichever, but they have that.
Yeah.
But like more into the operational piece.
Sure.
Like, for example, when I'm hearing about people, since, reading your stuff years ago and hearing you explain it, when I hear people that are wanting to buy assets, I'm like, well, why would you own stuff? Right. And never mind the return on capital. From a return on capital perspective, which is the ultimate measure of a CEO, a lot of times owning assets isn't good for that, but just the organizational energy that it takes.
The overhead of having to manage it, etc.
Exactly. But that's an example that I'm familiar with. I'm just curious what you've seen, though, is most impactful for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, just back to the BHAG reference. So MTP, or the massive transformative purpose, as we call it, is essentially a BHAG with a purpose. That's
Yeah, exactly.
right? So, and it derives from some of Jim Collins' amazing work. Operationally, what we found is there are 2-3 attributes that are critical to apply. For example, dashboards and OKRs, right? And scaling up brings in some of this stuff.
Same idea. Yep.
If you're not leveraging that, then you're not going to scale, because it becomes, we actually see OKRs as kind of like the operating system of a company at the most fundamental level. The second one is leveraging community. Very, very few medium to big companies leverage community at all. Okay, I'll give you the quick story of Xiaomi, which is the second biggest phone company in China. They have created a community of 1,000 super users, and those 1,000 super users vote on what features should go into the next phone. Okay, then they get the phone 3 months earlier than everybody else, and can vote to boast to their friends, hey, look, I voted for this feature, now it's in there. So they get chops for doing that. Just by doing that, this company is launching phones with no PR, product development, marketing, or promotional costs, meaning that means they can keep the cost low with just word of mouth. And they're the second biggest phone company because of that, right? Just by applying community. So we've got some amazing data, and yet most middle-sized to large-sized companies do a terrible job of leveraging community.
Yes.
Right? Because if you get a thriving community, look at the Apple community, literally is pulling products and services out of them, right? You get up with this, what John Hagel used to call the power of pull. And then you get into almost like a flow state as a company.
Interesting. So community is one. If there was a second one that you would say
these days, it's got to be AI and algorithms.
I was going to ask about
It's freakish. It's absolutely freakish what's going to happen. So a guy called Imad Mustak is the founder of Stability AI, which is the main alternative to ChatGPT. He was on our advisory board for a couple of years, and then he stepped off the advisory board last year. I'm like, hey, we really need you. And he's like, my world's about to explode. So we got an early look at what was coming with the LLMs. And it's kind of, what I find amazing is the founders of those tools are blown away by how good they are, right? So for example, each software developer now can become somewhere between 10 to 100x more effective.
Right.
Marketing, copy, anything to do with software and hardware documentation completely gets redone. So the cost of doing business now drops radically. The cost of doing marketing and sales drops radically. It's a game changer at so many levels, it's unheard of. And I think most people get concerned we'll lose jobs. We absolutely don't see that at all. We think what'll happen is we'll just amplify and up-level the capabilities. Just like when we introduced computers, we didn't lose jobs. We now have all these new functions like web designer and funnel analyst. Now we have a new job description called prompt engineer that never existed before.
I can believe it. So if you go back to the ball bearing manufacturer as an example, and AI, and lots of CEOs we're talking to are looking for ways to leverage AI, and the marketing copy, customer service, and dealing with customer service. With clients, they're finding ways to make that happen. They see it will replace a huge amount of the customer service and probably give better consistent service. So in terms of so there's things like that. But if we take the ball bearing manufacturer metaphorically, what are the opportunities for somebody like that?
Yeah, so imagine you're a ball bearing manufacturer. You've got a certain composite of what your ball bearings are made of, right? Now you can go to AI and say, give me a composite or some sort of material structure that gives me the same strength in the ball bearings, but drops the cost 50%. Okay, now I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're the AI, figure it out. And the AI will literally lead you through a bunch of things. I'll give you a small example. There's something
innovation, got it, yeah.
There's something called the Materials Project, okay, which is the most amazing little innovation. It's a nonprofit open source database where they've taken 500,000 compounds and cataloged in great detail the material, physical, electrical, chemical properties of these compounds. So let's say you're a battery manufacturer and you're trying to figure out, is there a better compound than lithium ion? A traditional researcher is going to linearly say, well, maybe lithium air is better, or lithium sulfur, and let me try out that compound, see if it works. Well, now you can literally ask an AI to scour this database, find the 5 compounds that will fit this thermal retention and this energy delivery, and it'll go, yeah, here's the answer, right? So now, instead of like arbitrarily over a long period of time, a researcher figuring this out, now this happens. I showed this database to the CEO of 3M, and he was not happy. Right? Because they have 7,000 researchers dreaming up new compounds that are now, what do you need them for?
They're now
So
open source. Yeah.
this is completely a game changer at so many levels. It's like where do you even start?
Wow, I can see that. So our innovation, our R&D, a lot of that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else where people and business leaders should be looking to leverage AI in different ways?
I think the way I would think, I'll give you the quick anecdote of an Australian public company called Smart Group. Okay, they do benefits management for HR, benefits management, fleet management for cars for big companies, and they are a B2B company, services company. They use the ExO model, and every quarter they have 10 projects for the 10 attributes running. And every quarter they re-up the projects.
Interesting.
So every quarter they're refreshing their own org structure, saying how are we going to apply this, how are we going to apply this, how are we going to apply this, etc.
Wow.
They've grown 7x in a 6-year period.
Wow.
Right? Like, so
that's incredible.
I think that's where we'll end up. And I think what will happen is so I'll give you an example. Lean startup thinking, you have to think about what assumptions should I test in my department, right? What hypotheses should I have? Well, before you had to come up with the hypotheses and run the experiment, right? Now you can say, I'm a legal department in a real estate company, right? What assumptions should I be testing? And the AI will design the experiment, right?
Interesting.
So this is where it requires a totally different mindset and maybe some psychedelics to get your head around it.
Yeah.
But once you do, you can basically ask the AI to just figure it out for you, and it'll do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're giving different prompts. Like we have a client in another country. I don't want to define because it relates to strategy, but they wanted a notable business that's well known around the world, and they wanted to come up with a new product line, and they needed a brand. They went to AI and said, "Hey, I need a brand for this specific type of market for this type of product." It did better than what they would have paid a branding firm a few $100,000 to do. What it came up with was exceptional. And then it said, how about some product formulations?
That's right.
And what it came back with, like it was B+ to A- grade work in a bit of time with the CEO just on his computer.
So I do work with like Procter & Gamble, Unilever, typically it's C-suite or board level. Whenever I go now for an engagement, I've asked ChatGPT, how would I disrupt Unilever? And it'll spit me out a list of 10 things. And I go, here's a list. And they're like, oh my God. And it's so good for just a tick list. And can I share my screen once more? I want to share
of course.
something.
Yep.
So for this book, given where we have to be, we actually created a chatbot AI for EXO. So you can go to openexo.com/chat and for free say, I'm a shipping company in Brazil. How would I 10x myself? And it literally go through the entire corpus of the book and tell you, here are the 5 things you need to do.
That is awesome.
So
I'm going to check that out.
Because that's like nuts. That's like crazy not to do it, right? So we've moved our overall whole thing into a subscription model because we're updating the book now in real time. We're loading up 700 case studies into it. So all of that will be available by the LLM. My recommendation to people would be go join and get a subscription so that you have access to all of that.
That's awesome. On another side, I remember when we were talking, you did a session in Vancouver, and you were talking about education.
Yeah.
And where education was going. And I believe my son, I was either thinking of my son, or he actually may have come with me. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to go back and look. But what are your thoughts on the education system and where that's heading?
Oh my God, where do I start? How much time do we have? Okay,
yeah.
So fundamentally, over the last few hundred years, we've industrialized the education system, and we do this factory-based, 60 kids in a classroom where you're trying to cram algebra into them, right?
Right, yep.
And mostly they're thinking about lunch. We don't take into account that some kids have different learning patterns. They maybe are more auditory than visual, all of that stuff. And we've been, for the entire education system for the last few hundred years is about job schooling. And it's supply side. You learn a skill. You're an accountant, you're an engineer, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer. Then you go to the job marketplace and you try and sell those skills. Right? That's the fundamental push paradigm.
Yep, it is. Yep.
We're seeing that flip around now. What we're going to see happen is education is going to shift to the demand side, where you'll say, I want to, like Elon, I want to go to space. And now let's find the educational components, the technology, the processes, the disciplines you need to solve the problem side of the equation, right? Because then it's much more exciting There's a form of schooling called democratic education where when a 7-year-old shows up to school, you ask the kid, what do you want to be? And the kid goes, I want to be a fireman. He goes, great. Now you need to learn about safety, chemistry, pyrotech, that kind of stuff, team building. If 6 months later the kid says, I want to be an astronaut, then you literally form a curriculum saying, okay, now you need to know about astrophysics and orbital pathways and whatever. And you form a curriculum based on what the child wants to do and who they want to, what fundamental domain do they want to operate in. And we think that's the model. Because think about this today. The most valuable employees and colleagues you have today are the ones that learn the fastest.
It is. And if you look at, and we're big on that in all of our organizations, that you need to be, if you leaders or learners, and if you want to be, you got to learn a lot.
Yeah.
But you need to, but it like a heck of a lot. And you got to process a lot of information to stay on top of it. And
well, this is
most
why
people don't.
Most people don't. This is why AI is so critical, because there's so much information being thrown at us today. We need AI to process it all. Like, for example, if you're a cancer doctor, there are 2,000 cancer research papers published every day today.
What?
Yeah, 2,000 new cancer research papers. So if you're an oncologist, you have no hope in reading 2,000 papers. You can barely read like 2 a day, right? So your patients are less well served than if you had an AI scanning all those papers and then saying, hey, I've got a patient with these symptoms, and the AI will go, oh, check out these 3 research papers.
Read the
for
breakthroughs,
breakthroughs,
right?
How much better of a doctor are you at that point? Like 1,000 times better. And that's, I think, what will happen with, for example, lawyers. You can actually draft a contract with ChatGPT today.
I've done it. I've done a basic one that was a low risk, but I just needed it, and it did a pretty good job.
It's a pretty good job of it. And so now drafting contracts becomes 10x easier for a lawyer, etc. So their domain after domain is going to get rapidly automated. Again, we don't believe in the radical job loss thing. It just means people will be that much better lawyers, doctors, engineers.
Right. Yeah, I think
the education system will shift from a push-based system to a pull-based learning system. Okay.
I love that. That makes so much sense, which is the way that a lot of the executives that we work with go and learn what you need to learn.
Except for one problem, which is that academia has the second worst immune system in the world.
Oh, yeah.
God help you if you try and update it. Can I tell you a quick anecdote here?
Of course.
A few years ago, I get asked to speak at a conference of 700 deans of business schools. Right? Like, who knew? But there's an annual conference where 700 deans get together. So they asked me, can you come and do the opening keynote? So I'm like, sure. So I show up, and the organizer kind of goes, hey, can't wait to hear from Salim. He's going to tell us the latest that he heard from the ExO, da, 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 da. Except what he sees in the audience is complete blank looks, right? And he notices this, like there's a complete non-recognition of Salim or ExO in this audience. So he goes, how many of you have read ExO? 700 deans of business schools, 2 raise their hands, okay? Now, not that everybody in the world should read the book or whatever, but if you're a car designer and the Tesla shows up, you may or may not like the Tesla. You should jolly well know what it is and that it's there. And so I just couldn't, think about this idea. There's no MBA program in the world still that can teach you how to build Uber, right? Every MBA program in the world still teaches you how to build a 20th century organization. So that entire domain needs to be rethought from the bottom up. And so this is the level of scale of intervention we're seeing coming via technology, coming via AI.
Right. And it's why there's such great opportunities for the people who want to be the disruptors, because the incumbents generally are so stuck in their ecosystems, it's next to impossible for them to change.
Yeah, and I know you deal with a lot of mid-market companies. For me, that's the most exciting sector, because as a startup, you're constantly worried about running out of money, right?
Yeah.
But a big company, you can't innovate, your immune system is too strong. But a mid-market company can really make hay by applying some of these principles and blowing it open to a global level. And I want to kind of just touch on one quick thing, which is the economic thesis and underpinnings of what we call an ExO, right? So when you're running a business, you worry about demand and supply. Specifically, what's the cost of demand? What's the cost? Hopefully you're on the right side of the equation. The internet came along, and for the first time in business history, allowed us to drop dramatically and exponentially the cost of acquisition. Right? Every Silicon Valley company is trying for a viral loop, in which your acquisition costs go to 0. And for the first time in business, you could acquire customers at no cost. What exponential organizations have figured out how to do is how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? So think about Airbnb. The marginal cost of adding a room to their inventory is near zero. Mm-hmm. If you're a Hyatt, you have to build a hotel, right? So same with Waze, same with Uber, and all these EXOs have figured out how to radically drop the marginal cost of supply. So now you have these crazy startups entering legacy industries with almost no cost of demand and almost no cost of supply. And that's why they're scaling so fast, and that's why the valuation is so crazy.
Yeah, and they have no internal friction that they're trying to fight against, no ecosystem that's trying to trying to
in the book them. And there's an old law called Coase's law, right? Ronald Coase, an economist in the 1930s, wrote a 9-page paper for which he won the Nobel Prize, and he basically said the reason we have big companies is that transaction costs inside a big company are cheaper than outside, because it's you have economies of scale and you have all alignment of purpose and processes, etc. In this second edition, we declare Coase's law dead, because it's actually cheaper to do things outside the company than inside, in many cases, especially in big companies where it takes so long to get decisions done, etc. And so we actually declare Coase's law dead, which means that big companies as a category are under big threat. Right, small companies growing as an EXO, turning into platforms and ecosystems is where we think the future is.
It is interesting. We have a number of our clients that basically their business is outsourcing processes from big companies to them. You know, a company doing it with forklifts and batteries, and another with payroll and all kinds of number of firms we work with.
We have a partner called MBO Partners. Okay. And they manage contractors for big companies, and they're able to drop the cost because they can do the onboarding, offboarding, training, etc. at a way cheaper level. So they're able to onboard, and most companies have like 3 to 5% contractors. We think that grows to 30% because you need that flexibility. And so you need services like this and the ones that you're talking about to help navigate how you're going to manage all these contractors and how you elegantly manage all of this new skills, because you get freshness into the loop when you do this. If you hire a data engineer today, right? A, they're hard to find. B, they're hard to hire because they all want to work for Google or LinkedIn. And then if you hire them, they're hard to manage because they speak geek and they have weird hours and whatever. And even if you get them on board, 6 months later, they're out of date, because the techniques are changing so fast. Sure. Like, why would you hire somebody? Figure out how to prescriptively describe that task and then hire a contractor to do it, or an AI.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. So kind of 2 questions to kind of wrap up with, and before we do it, what is updated for those that have read the original Exponential Organizations? What's different in 2.0? And then I got 2 questions to wrap up.
Sure. What's different is the subscription model, because now we've got a model where people can keep up to date on the thing. But in the book itself, it's about 90% rewritten, because 90%, the original model was kind of like a hypothesis. We think expand. Now we have like 10 years of data and anecdotes, and what we've done is for each attribute gone really deep. So for staff on demand, we go, what is it? How do you describe it? What are case studies? What are benefits and challenges of implementing it, tips and tricks, and how do you get started implementing this particular attribute? And we do that for all attributes. So people are not taking the book and just staff on demand, give it to HR and go implement that, right? Algorithms, all right, here's the CIO, go figure out how to implement this. And so people are taking it by function and then applying the attributes at depth.
Great. Where do you see things going, like consulting firms? We're in the consulting space. How do you see that? Like, if you look at the McKinseys and the Bains and all the big consulting firms, where do you see that going?
I would love to say that those are very disrupted, and they are at one level, because the content and the intellect can now be replicated with AI. However, there's a human factor that you can't replicate, right? So for example, you may be coaching somebody and they should be implementing scaling up techniques or the Rockefeller methods or whatever, but they don't have the mindset to do it. And so you have to coach them into having the right mindset. And I think that human aspect, plus the volatility of the market and the world today is so high, that advisory work is more important in the future, just because that volatility means that even if you figured something out, it's that whole framing is out of date and you need to refresh yourself. We actually end the book with a chapter on mindsets for how do you need to think about what mindsets do you need to bring to the table to succeed. So I think advisory becomes weirdly more important. It'll just be very transformed in how you think about it. Oops.
Yep, I can totally see that. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, you're still there. Good. Again,
No,
and and again, in our part, because the relation, like I'm having a conversation with the CEO, and it was about mindset, and it's about they're surrounded by opportunities and trying to. There's the ones he wants to do, and then there's the ones he needs to do, and that kind of stuff. AI isn't going to do it because there's a discussion and things like that. But the access to the information, and from our perspective, if the advisors aren't staying up with the stuff, they're going to be just like the people that are stuck in in the 1980s or 90s or 2000s and
pick your advisors.
Stuck in an old pick your advisors very carefully and
pick your advisors very carefully. For folks like yourself that are so on the cutting edge and maintain that because you have to, then you've got great advisors because you can then, that they're scouring and scanning and curating the right approaches and breakthroughs for what you're trying to do.
That's why we're, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. Something that we've seen people do, by the way, is say to our chatbot, here's our MTP, here are 6 opportunities. Which one should I go after? And the AI basically comes back and says, you should do those 3. They line up better.
Those are great ideas, Salim. Just thinking about different things, because we've been testing it in all types of things, and it's been helpful in some tactical things, but taking bigger strategic things, that's a great idea. So
we're pretty clear that over the next decade, our head of community, Kevin Allen, actually calls this the decade of the EXO, because we have now the data that shows that over the next 10 years, every government department, every nonprofit, every impact project, every company will basically tend towards being architected this way because we have the data. It's just better.
Awesome. I love it. So final thing. So to the CEOs and execs that are listening, what would you recommend they do for their own learning and to get more of an EXO mindset and kind of, to transform their own thinking so that they can lead this properly?
I think, well, number one, I'm biased, but go read the book because we've put 3-4 years of effort into it and we've curated it. I'm much more proud of it than I thought I would be. Let's put it that way.
Awesome.
The first book, I think, sold 750,000 copies. It'll end up, and the second book is kind of off to the races again. So we think that's a key one. The second one is actually, you should get a subscription because we actually have a whole set of tools like an EXO Canvas. We have a whole tool set to breaking the immune system, which we've first. Yeah. So we piloted a 10-week program with Procter & Gamble. And we said, let's see if we can hack culture at scale inside your company. Right. And it worked.
That's awesome.
In fact, it worked so well, we thought maybe we got lucky. Maybe we caught them at the right time, etc. They're pretty advanced. We did it a second time with the largest insurance company in Mexico, which is family owned, regulated, etc. And it worked even better. So we formed a 10-week advisory kind of engagement that we run inside companies. And we've done it now 60 times, Black & Decker, HP, Visa, etc. And we've open sourced it so people can come pick up the tool set, hire coaches in our community, assemble a team and run that process themselves.
That's
awesome. So, and what we found heuristically is we're able to move leadership, culture, and management thinking 3 years ahead in that 10-week period. And if you're more than 50 people, you have an immune system problem, right?
Yeah.
So the only model for the future is take your crazy people to the edge and launch an EXO off the edge, and then run this process internally to break the immune system and not have it attack those newborns. And then that combination gives you the best shot, as you saw with your client in the Middle East, right? That has a best shot at growing you 10x every 3-4 years.
I love it. Love it. And that goes back to the 10x thinking. And that's when I first heard you present this stuff, Salim, it got me thinking notably different. And, for me, even just as knowing it well and going and implementing it in a bunch of clients. And now you've got me re-energized to go and do it again. Well,
can I do one last plug?
Yes. One last thing. And then thanks.
For the launch of the book, we're doing a 3-for-1 promotion. So if people sign up for a year at $20 a month, we're actually including 3 years of membership for free.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to do it for sure because I know the thinking. It's so easy to get stuck in the logical linear thinking of where you're at.
Yeah.
And every time I'm connected with you and have read the book and heard you speak, it takes the thinking up to the future and where it's going to be versus being stuck where we are. And I know that's super important. And that's my job to do with my CEOs as well and with my team. So thank you for your great work, Salim. And I appreciate you making the time. And yeah, cheers to everyone that decides to go and really be exponential. It's an exciting ride.
Great to be here, Kevin. Nice to connect with you again.
Yeah, you too. All right. Have a great day. Thanks.
You too.